During World War II, the war on the Eastern Front fought by the Soviet Union was much different than the war fought by the Western Allies. The primary focus, in terms of bombers, was on tactical aviation and close air support. That's attacking German staging areas and active combatants out on live battlefields. Now, in contrast, the Western Allied bombing campaign mostly focused on strategic targets like manufacturing and heavy industry. As a result of this, there were very few resources put into developing large and heavy bombers in the Soviet Union. Then, during the last few months of the war in the Pacific, several B-29s performed emergency landings in Soviet territory during the American bombing campaign against Japan. The Soviets impounded the aircraft, saying officially that they were honoring the terms of the neutrality treaty that they had with Japan. However, it wasn't long before the orders came down from Moscow. Development of other bombers was to cease immediately, and the B-29 was to be copied. Exactly, part for part. This was an absolutely enormous undertaking. Over 900 different OKBs and factories were involved in the reverse engineering and production effort, and it's not a hyperbole to say that this project alone was a major contributor to the Soviet Union's economic boom in the late 1940s. There were an enormous number of challenges. Everything from metal thickness needing conversion from imperial to metric, ramping up production of new metal alloys, and even dealing with a brief paper shortage because of the quantity of large blueprints and design documents that were involved. There were also bureaucratic hurdles to overcome, with even the smallest divergence from the original B-29 needing approval from high-level generals and politicians. In the end, the new plane, named Tu-4, wasn't quite identical to the B-29, but it was very close. It had different engines, a newer radio system, a different IFF unit, obviously, cannons in the turrets instead of machine guns, and some other smaller modifications, mostly to the internal systems. In the end, over 800 Tu-4s were built, and while it only served as a strategic bomber through the 1950s, its legacy in the Soviet aviation industry lasted for decades. About a dozen of them were also gifted to the People's Republic of China and served in various forms for many years, including as a gunship, an early warning radar carrier, and as a test launcher for cruise missiles. What we get in War Thunder are two versions of the Tu-4 in the Soviet and Chinese tech trees. Both are in rank 5 at battle rating 8.0 for air and 7.7 for ground. These planes are basically identical, with the primary difference being the bomb loadouts. The Tu-4 has no electronic systems or sensors, but it does get a useful optical bomb sight. It also features 5 gun turrets, each with a pair of hard-hitting 23mm cannons. This is actually a really strong defensive setup, and if you can master aiming them, it's a surprisingly effective screen at keeping enemy fighters away, as this plane has a reputation of being a bit of a porcupine. To be clear, you can see in the footage that I'm only average at manning the gun turrets manually myself. The bomb load of the Tu-4 is, well, enormous. Besides 4 of the huge Fab 3000 bombs, it can take dozens of smaller bombs, but regardless, you've got options for really any style of bombing. My personal preference is usually a smaller quantity of heavier bombs, but if you want to carpet bomb the map with Fab 250s or something, the Tu-4 has you covered. In terms of its flight performance, the Tu-4 is a huge prop bomber stuck in a jet fight. Among other 4-engine heavy prop bombers, it compares well. It has a good rate of climb, a high maximum speed, and a very high ceiling altitude. But the problem is, War Thunder's matchmaker sticks it at the entry-level jet tier. So, compared to other planes in live matches, the flight performance is pretty awful. Still, there are some general bits to look at. In a dive, its wings will rip off at a little over 600 kilometers an hour, so you'll want to make sure to watch the airspeed when you're returning to base after a bombing run. You can drop combat flaps up to about 325 kilometers an hour, but the plane can only take about 4 Gs anyway, so don't expect this thing to be a good turn performer or anything like that. The engines can be prone to some mild overheating, especially if you cruise around at max throttle. You can mitigate that to a bit with manual engine controls, but I've found even on normal controls, cruising at 90 to 95% generally works pretty well. When it comes time to fly the Tu-4 out in air battles, it generally goes one of two ways. You get wasted by jet fighters fairly early in a match, or you fend them off and get left alone, bombing everything on the ground that you can find. In my own experience with this bomber, air matches are generally either flops, where I go home with a donut, or huge scoring matches where I rack up thousands of points. Occasionally I'll get shot down by a missile or something halfway through a match, but for whatever reason, there's usually not a whole lot of middle ground for me with the Tu-4. Now, the good news is that the bomb load is enormous and can win matches by itself. In fact, the Chinese Tu-4 can carry enough incendiary bombs to destroy, let me do some quick Tim math here, 20 fucking bases in one sortie. Yeah, so that's a thing. But even the Soviet version can still clear the map, and if it's left alone, or if you actually get fighter cover from the Blue Gang, the Tu-4s can be very effective point generators. Now, I also want to talk about the gun turrets for a moment. The turrets on this thing hit incredibly hard, but at the jet tiers, you often need to start shooting farther away in order to discourage enemy fighters from getting in too close, or at least force them into some defensive maneuvers and throw off their firing solution on the way in. Now, the good news with that is that if you can get good at aiming the turrets, and I'm not, by the way, most people are going to know better than to get too close to this plane. If you fly this out as close air support, for some reason, you end up being incredibly vulnerable to player-controlled SPAA at this BR. Even at larger distances, it's just such a huge target that it's really easy to attack. My advice is to use the larger bombs and chuck them half blind into spots where you think the bad guys might be in 10 seconds, then immediately turn off and run back to the airfield. Don't linger over the battle, because as soon as you get spotted, 5 enemy players are going to spawn into Gepards and XM246s. Guaranteed every time. Visually, the Tu-4 is a beautiful aircraft, just like the B-29 it's copied from, but as of making this video, there's a bug where the landing gear bay doors start half open when you spawn in. I have no idea why this happens, and it's a thing on both versions of the plane. Come on, Snail. Landing the Tu-4 is fairly difficult if you haven't practiced it a bit. Like some of the other large bombers, it can be a little floaty on final approach, and if you don't come in on a good power curve, it can be pretty difficult to lose that last 50 kilometers an hour of airspeed, and you may end up bouncing a bit. You can put landing flaps down at about 265 kilometers an hour and gear at about 370, but try to set down early, as this plane often needs a lot of runway in order to stop. The cockpit is, unfortunately, an awful low-poly placeholder with poor visibility and ugly internals. I did not enjoy this plane at all in VR. To close out on the Tu-4. This plane carries an absolutely insane bomb load. Its gun turrets hit very hard, and it has a good quantity of gun turrets. However, it's a huge, lumbery whale of a plane. It's dramatically outperformed by everything it faces. It faces air-to-air missiles. Its takeoff and landing performance is awful, and it's exceptionally vulnerable to head-on attacks. The final verdict on the Tu-4 is that this plane is kind of a dichotomy. Matches are either really fun or really stupid, without a whole lot of middle ground. This is the endgame of prop bombers in War Thunder, at least until we get the B-36 someday. As always, thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, check out this other one.